pruning put you off growing trained fruit trees. The apples growing on this arch are really just glorified cordons, and the pruning is, well, as easy as falling off a ladder. It's all done at this time of the year, and what you do is to start out looking for shoots that have grown out of the main stem this year, and you can see that there's one here, and you prune that back just above a bud to about 3 inches. You then look for shoots that have grown out of those that you pruned last year. Now you can see that's where I pruned last year, and this is a new shoot that has grown out of that this year, and you cut that back to 1 inch, just above a bud. Well, our programme is a little shorter this week, but it's packed with pleasant surprises. We enter the mysterious world of vegetable showing when Medwin Williams gives us his guide to growing some gentle giants. Vanessa Collingridge discovers an antidote to dragons amongst some little-known uses for ancient herbs. And I'll be solving some of your problems with cuttings in intensive care. But first, have you met Prince Igor, the Maid of Orleans, or even Fiery Fred? Well, you probably have, actually, because they're plants that we've been growing in our gardens since the beginning of the 18th century. They're torch lilies, or red-hot pokers. Adrian Bloom.
We gardeners owe a lot to South Africa for some really quite spectacular garden plants. The agapanthus, for instance, to the crocosmias, and lastly, but certainly not least, the Kniphophias, or the red-hot pokers. Red-hot pokers, you may say? This isn't red, and in fact, this isn't the sort of plant that most people will think of as a red-hot poker. But it is just one of a great range now available of colours that span from red to yellow to orange, and now to a sort of salmon and cream. And also the sizes of the plants going from about 15 inches to over 6 feet. In 1700, the first species of Kniphofia was introduced from South Africa to Britain. This was Kniphofia uvaria, and this is really the one that has become the most commonly seen and the most commonly appreciated as the red-hot poker. This actually starts flowering much earlier in the season, normally in June, and then it's quite spectacular. But it will vary in its flowering performance according to where it's grown and what part of the country. Perhaps one of the earliest varieties to flower is Kniphofia atlanta. Now this can flower as early as April or May. Now with a name like Atlanta, I thought, well, surely there must be an exotic history to this plant. Perhaps it was involved somehow in the Civil War in North America and came from Atlanta, Georgia. But no, the truth is actually somewhat more mundane. Good a variety though it is, it was actually discovered growing in a garden in the Atlanta Hotel in Tintagel, Cornwall. Somebody certainly had a sense of humour when they called this variety Fiery Fred. It certainly is quite fiery, but I'm not sure who Fred is. There's little doubt of the effect that the taller Kniphophias can have in the summer garden, really adding a touch of glory. Samuel Sensation, for instance, was introduced many years ago, and this variety is still going very strong. It has striking red flowers against the dark stems, and really is an excellent contrast against plants like Aster-fricati. Now this Kniphofia really is different. In fact, it could hardly bear the common name red-hot poker. There is another common name, and that's the torch lily, reminding us that the Kniphofia is a member of the lily family. This really is a very attractive form. It's made of Orleans, and it grows to about 2 feet. It's a variety that's been with us a number of years, and against this Agapanthus patens, it really does make a show. From the sublime to the fantastic. How about this for a red-hot poker? It really is quite amazing. This is Prince Igor. This grows to 6 to 8 feet, and if you look at the size and colour of those, for a dramatic effect in the garden, it would be hard to beat. This may be at the top end of the scale, but at the bottom end of the scale is an earlier flowering species, and that only grows to about 15 inches, and that's called Kniphofia hirsuta. That actually means it has hairy leaves, and it flowers with a profusion, in fact, in May and June. The Kniphophias are sun-loving plants with quite a fleshy root system. And although one would think that they like to really dry soil, in fact, they like to have a little bit of moisture during the summertime, so a good fertile soil helps. They are quite hardy plants, so I think it does help to protect some of them through their first winter at least. But as far as planting is concerned, well, in containers you can plant them out during most of the year unless it's very wet or cold. And any of the plants that you have in the garden, or you might be wanting to swap with one of your neighbours, actually the best time then is divide and split them in late spring and water them in well in the normal way, and they'll be away too.
Doesn't even make it sound easy. Which is more than you can say, I'm afraid, for some advice that I've been giving about cuttings, because I've had a few letters about problems. It's not the actual taking of the cuttings, it seems that's pretty easy. And as you probably know, you can take all sorts of softwood cuttings from shrubs and herbaceous plants right the way through the summer, and it really is very simple. You just take a shoot about 3 inches long, take the leaves off the bottom, trim just below a leaf joint, dip the whole cutting into a liquid fungicide, dip the bottom into hormone rooting powder or liquid, dibble it into a compost of 50-50 coir and vermiculite, water it in with the fungicide, cover over with a polythene bag so that the polythene actually touches the leaves, and put the pot into a shaded cold frame. But it's then that the problems start. And the first question is, how do I know when they've rooted? Well, you'll have to take the polythene bag off from time to time and just have a look at them. And they just really generally perk up and begin to look a bit happier. And you can see they look as though they have rooted. But then just to make sure, you just want to give them a little tug, and you should get a certain amount of resistance beneath the compost, and then you know you've got roots there. But do bear in mind that they're in a very rarefied atmosphere underneath that polythene bag. They've got plenty of heat and plenty of moisture, and if you bring them straight out into the colder, drier air, they might well die. So what you need to do is to cover them up straight away with the polythene bag and then wean them off it. And the way you do that is just to cut a little slit in the top there, like that, and then put it back in the frame for a week. After a week, you just widen the slit a little bit more, like that, and put them back in for another week. And then they should be ready to come out and face the world. Now, I've had a pot in here that has been weaning for a couple of weeks, so they are now ready for potting up. And let's just have a look and see what sort of root system we've got on there. Oh yeah, that's pretty nice. And that is now ready for potting on into a normal coir-based compost. I put a bit of grit and bark into mine, which I think makes it a bit better. And that can then stand outside in a shady place, and once it's rooted right through, it can go out in the garden. My little herb garden is beginning to look quite good now. You may remember that I planted it up in the first week of April this year with about 20 of my favourite herbs. Well, a couple of weeks ago, Vanessa Collingridge visited a gardener who grows hundreds of herbs, and each one with a special purpose.
If you've only ever thought of using herbs in cookery, then perhaps it's time to pay a visit here. This garden produces natural herb dyes used to colour this wool, while some of the other herbs also go into making herbal remedies, treating everything from sore feet to sore throats.
On this side we have the oregano.
In fact, this working herb garden has over 300 different varieties, each with its own use, and all keeping writer Christina Stapley busy throughout the year.
Well, it began about 25 years ago when I was writing a novel, and it was set in Elizabethan times. And I needed to know about herbs in order to write the novel, and I thought, well, this is something you can do on a wet afternoon at the time. And the wet afternoon is still going on, in fact. And because the Elizabethans used them in every aspect of their lives, medicinally and in cookery and for dyeing and the crafts, I've tended to explore their avenues and bring Elizabethan recipes up to date.
The herb garden is divided into 9 different sections, each having a specific purpose.
And now we come to the part of the garden which I have reserved for the crafts. So a lot of it has been allowed to grow wild, and that way I have the taller fennel and nettles and the other plants for paper making, as well as plants for dyes. And so we have weld and woad and madder and alkanet of the old dyes, and then the newer dyer's chamomile, which gives you rather a beautiful colour if you use chrome as a mordant.
You have to work with a fixing agent of some description, do you?
Yes, you do need the mordant.
So how much of the plant are you actually using?
Just using the flowering top.
And this would go straight onto the stove and be boiled for how many hours?
About an hour. And another herb that I definitely wouldn't be without is weld. And this is an ancient herb, and it has been used as a dye, both commercially and a cottage industry sort of application. And that gives me a yellow and a green, a beautiful green.
Now, looking around this part of the garden, there are a few plants that I wouldn't necessarily call herbs. How do you define a herb?
For me, it is a plant which I grow specifically for use. Therefore, either as a dye or in a fragrance sachet, or for making paper like the nettles, spinning the fibres, any of those things. The real function of a herb is to be harvested, and if you don't harvest them, then they tend to be straggly or spread about the garden.
This must be the medicinal physic garden.
These are the physic beds, yes. And here we have sneezewort, which is good fun. Sneezewort used to go into herbal snuff. And nowadays, I gather it and hang dry the flowers, and they dry beautifully for flower crafts.
What about the elecampane? Now, that's a remedy for bronchial complaints, isn't it? But
it
what
is,
part
yes.
of the plant do you actually use?
Well, I use the root, and I just candy the root and then liquidize it and put a couple of drops into cough sweets. It's very, very powerful, very strong.
What about these wonderful things?
The agrimony goes into wine. It's a dye, but it's also a physic herb, and it was used for wounds at one time, for the wounds from the first handgun, and also for eye problems, liver problems. And in the summertime, if you have a cold, you can make a refreshing and healing drink with the agrimony and lemons and ginger.
Sounds far better than most medicines, anyway.
Yes.
Now, Bethany down here is known as a bit of a cure-all, but what specifically do you use it for?
In fact, I gather that, and this is another one for flower crafts now, unless I ever happen to be bothered by dragons, in which case I can surround them with Bethany.
I don't think we're going to be troubled with the dragons here.
This is the Serenity, which has the sedatives and tranquilizers and herbs to cheer the melancholy.
This is a wonderful knot, but isn't it stretching it a wee bit to have things like pinks and your marigolds down here?
The pinks are very much a herb. They were known originally as clove gillyflowers, and they went into syrups and into liqueurs and preserves, and they were to cheer the melancholy.
Is there any particular significance to this knot?
It, in fact, is a lover's knot. So it has the 3 loops of silver cotton lavender and the 3 of germander going in the other direction to get the contrast. And we made it to celebrate our 22nd wedding anniversary.
Oh, lovely. And also these mints over here must be very good at cheering people up as well, I can imagine.
That's right. We have a selection of mints in the Serenity. The eau de cologne mint underneath the seat is quite a source of fragrance. As you sit down, if you brush against it, then you have this lovely cloud of fragrance which comes about you.
You could certainly get used to this.
The dog likes to lie underneath amongst the mints.
This beautiful plant is Seneccio tangutica, now correctly known as Cyanocalia tangutica, and I wouldn't want to be without it. But it is a hooligan. It has very thick running roots, and if you plant it in a border with other plants, it will very quickly take over and swamp everything. The only way of growing it, in my view, is to contain it in an island bed surrounded by grass. Now, even then, in the spring, one or two juvenile delinquents will poke their heads up, but of course, as soon as you start mowing, they get the short, sharp shock treatment, they immediately reform, and the plant is contained. Now, the world of championship vegetables is mysterious and intriguing. Stories abound of petty jealousies and tantrums and most ungardener-like behaviour. But I suppose that when you're growing such demanding plants to such a high standard, even reasonable people are stretched to the limit. So, a few months ago, we joined Medwin Williams on the long path to perfection as he prepared for the National Vegetable Society Championships at Wisley.
Mark Twain once said that the cauliflower is nothing more than a cabbage with college education. Well, that might be right, actually, because I do think you need a degree to be able to get them spot on for the day of the show. I'm planting these cauliflowers nearly 1,000 feet above sea level in the Ogwen Valley. And the local farmer very kindly lets me have a couple of rows every year. Now, we might not think that this is particularly good soil here, for the simple reason that it's so very, very stony. But believe me, it produces marvellous curds every year. No collection of vegetables would be complete without the humble potato in it. And that's why I've grown 7 varieties in this garden. At this time of year now, the haulms are growing well and they need stringing up to keep them quite upright, because this humid, damp weather, believe me, will bring on blight. But over here, there's another job to be done, and that's removing all the flowers as they develop. I've been doing this now for the last fortnight, and the simple reason is that all the plant's energies otherwise will go to creating seeds or fruit on this flower head. What I want is the energies of the plant to go to still producing tubers. I hope there's going to be good ones here, but time will tell. Peas for the kitchen are usually grown through sticks or on a plastic mesh. But if you want them for exhibition, you've got to do something a bit special, and that's to grow them on the cordon system. That's where they're planted in the ground and trained up an 8-foot cane, and they're spaced roughly about 12 inches apart. Now, timing peas for show is very difficult, but the best tip I can give you is sow them 90 days before the date of the show. And then 30 days before that, you'll strip all the flowers off, because you don't want them to come too early. Funny enough, today is actually 30 days before the date for Wisley. So I'm going to strip all the flowers on here now for the last time. It's now crunch time. This is when I know if all the hard work that I've gone into growing these potatoes is going to pay off. A week ago, the haulms were cut off so that the skin on the potato could really set hard. Now, all I need to do is to get in there and find out what sort of quality potatoes that I really have got. Now, what you must not do is use a tool or an implement at all. The only implement you need to use are these, your hands. Now, there's one nice potato, typical shape for Mona Lisa, but a bit on the small side, so that'll do for the local classes. I'm really looking for something much bigger. For top quality National Vegetable Society Championships, you need potatoes around about 7 ounces in weight. Now, that's a nice potato again, but a lot deeper, much rounder potato. If you can get them to match like that, that's okay. And this is the problem with potatoes, it's getting them all to match, because uniformity is equally as important. Well, that's another beauty. Now then, let's see if that goes down. Turn it around. Come on. think I've snapped it. Yes, sir, this looks very promising. Wow. Hey, 6 like that will do me fine for whistling. I'm fairly pleased with this little lot. I just hope the judges are going to be also. Now for the staging. But that's about as far as you can come. You're not allowed to go into the tent because the National Vegetable Society has decreed there will be no cameras allowed in there. Why not? Don't ask me. I think you better ask them.
As a member, normal member of the MVS, I'd have thought we need all the publicity we can get, and normal circumstances we welcome. As people like Gardener's World, yourself, and newspapers, that sort of media. I can't comment on the decision, on who took it. Most of us just don't know. It hasn't been explained. We'd welcome an answer ourselves.
I'm not sure about during the judging, but when the members are staging their exhibits, I would have thought, welcome.
Well, in the last few years, I've been trying a lot of varieties to see which is the best. So this year I thought, oh, well, I'll put them all in and see how they go. And I put in 40 varieties and I brought 40 here today. It is difficult to grow exhibition potatoes because you've got to have the skins real clean. And that's the number one thing to start with. If you can get the cleanness, then you can work on the shape and the size and the uniformity and the shallow eyes.
This is my 6th win of this title of UK champion with runner beans. They're all sown in pots. None of the seed is sown in the open ground. They're nurtured in the greenhouse in heat to start off with, and then they put out in a nice, quiet, warm spell. It hasn't been the best of seasons, but I've done my best to get this dish of beans here. And I would say this is the best 18 beans I've ever put out in my life, and I've been growing beans for 30 years.
Well, I haven't had anything, but to be fair to them, the carrots are a bit poor, they're not heavy enough, and the parsnips are light, the potatoes are too big. But believe it or not, when I had a look at my cauliflowers, there was a caterpillar eating away there. So, but what more do they want? I mean, I'm offering them meat with the vegetables. But to be more serious, there are some fantastic exhibits here. The wonderful thing about growing vegetables for competition is the fact that you can't win all of them all of the time. But beware, next year I'll be back.
Well, it's a funny old business, isn't it? Well, that's it for this week. Next week, Pippa Greenwood looks at the long-awaited code of practice for the sale of poisonous plants and asks why it's taken so long to produce. Liz Rigby meets a gardener who was vertically challenged but has now fulfilled her steep ambitions. And I'll be investigating one of this season's major pest problems and taking advice on how to deal with it. Until then, have a great weekend. Goodbye.
And Gardener's World returns next Friday at its usual time of 8:30. And Adrian Bloom goes on the trail of the Red Hot Pokers in the September issue of the BBC Gardener's World magazine.
He was the Persuader, the man with his finger on the trigger of some of the most popular shows in television history. Join him on Saturday week for a TV night of your favorite surefire hits.
We've come to be rich and famous.
I like the sound of that.
From puppet master to patron saint of the action drama. From smash hit to smash hits. Lord Grade and friends invite you to join them for ATV Night. Saturday, 27th of August on BBC Two.
Now that was hilarious.
Yes, it was really funny.
You suppose they meant it to be?
Now on BBC Two, slightly later than billed because of this evening's live prom concert, Steptoe and Son.
Thank you, Lizzie.
Dad! Dad!